Lena sat across from her husband, Daniel, at dinner, her mind drifting as he spoke about his day. She had once been enamored with his calm demeanor and responsible nature, but lately his attentiveness had become a backdrop to her growing sense of dissatisfaction. He was loving, a partner who always took care of her, yet something was missing. The routines of married life, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Lena yearned for something more, something exciting, unpredictable. The passion that had once ignited their relationship had slowly faded, leaving only the dull hum of familiarity. She tried to shake off the feeling, blaming it on stress or a phase, but deep down, she couldn't deny the restlessness growing inside her. The thought of something or someone new began to take root, and with it, the desire to escape her monotonous life. Everyday life had become a series of repetitive moments, the same conversations, the same routine. Lena had once felt lucky to be in a marriage built on trust, love, and stability, but now it felt like she was drifting away from the person she used to be. She missed the excitement they used to share, the spontaneous adventures and passionate moments. Now she found herself counting the days, watching the clock tick as another dull evening passed. There were no surprises anymore, no sparks. The emptiness gnawed at her, filling her with a sense of longing she couldn't ignore. She wondered if this was just the natural progression of a marriage, or if it was something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed with a vacation or a weekend getaway. The thought of continuing like this filled her with dread, and the tension inside her began to build, like a pressure that might soon explode. When Daniel told Lena he would be away for the week visiting his parents, she was surprised by how much relief she felt. It wasn't that she didn't miss him, but the idea of being alone in the house felt like a much-needed escape from the daily grind. For the first time in a long time, she had no obligations, no dinners to prepare, no conversations to maintain. She told herself it was a perfect opportunity to recharge, to let loose, and escape the rigid boundaries of her life. A part of her fantasized about being wild, making impulsive decisions, and breaking free from the monotony. She had nothing to lose. The idea of freedom was intoxicating, and as the days without him stretched out before her, she felt a strange mix of excitement and guilt. It was as if something inside her was waking up, eager to embrace whatever this freedom might bring. The night Lena met her friends at the familiar bar, she felt a sense of exhilaration she hadn't experienced in months. The dim lights, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all felt like a world away from her predictable life. Her friends, noticing her quiet demeanor, teased her about how she seemed too good for a night out. They were eager to help her shake off her routine, to remind her of the woman she used to be, the one who loved to dance until her feet ached, the one who wore bold clothes and took risks. Lena laughed nervously, but as the drinks flowed, so did her inhibitions. She found herself enjoying the way her friends flirted with the idea of doing something daring, something different. It wasn't that she wanted to cheat, she didn't, but the thought of escaping her mundane existence was tempting. They encouraged her to step outside her comfort zone, to seize the night, and the more they pushed, the more her internal conflict grew. Should she stay the same or take a risk? As the alcohol took effect, she felt that familiar restlessness surge within her, a whisper urging her to make a choice she knew could change everything. As the night went on, Lena's attention was drawn to a man sitting at the bar, casually sipping his drink while scanning the crowd. He stood out, his confidence, the way he carried himself, and the way his eyes seemed to linger on her. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled her in despite her better judgment. He wasn't overtly handsome, but there was a quiet intensity about him that intrigued her. When their eyes met, she felt a flutter in her chest. He smiled at her, a slow, deliberate smile that made her heart skip. She quickly turned away, embarrassed by the unexpected reaction. But the man didn't give up. He approached her, his voice low and easy, striking up a conversation as if they had known each other for years. Lena hesitated, unsure of what to do. But the alcohol had already started to loosen her grip on the situation, and she found herself smiling back. There was no harm in a simple conversation, right? Yet, the more they talked, the more the attraction between them seemed to grow. She had never felt so alive, so seen. But where would it go from here? As the conversation between Lena and the man continued, the air seemed to thicken with unspoken tension. His words were casual, but his gaze never wavered from hers. He complimented her, laughed at her jokes, and for the first time in a long time, Lena felt noticed in a way she hadn't in years. There was something about him, his charm, his effortless confidence, that made her forget about the life she'd left behind, the husband waiting for her at home. At some point, the man invited her to his apartment. The offer seemed innocent enough, just a drink, maybe a quiet conversation, but inside, Lena hesitated. This wasn't her. She wasn't the type of woman to take such risks. Yet the thought of escaping the confines of her marriage, even for one night, was too alluring to resist. She justified it to herself. Just one night, just one mistake. It didn't matter. It was harmless. She was just trying to feel something again. She followed him out of the bar, her pulse quickening with excitement and guilt. This was it, the point of no return. Lena woke up in the stranger's bed with the faint scent of his cologne still lingering on her skin. For a moment there was no clarity, only the soft hum of confusion. She blinked against the morning light, taking in her surroundings. The night felt like a dream, a fleeting moment of escape that, in the light of day, seemed insignificant. She didn't regret what had happened, but the unease in her chest grew as she quietly slipped out of the bed. She told herself it didn't matter. It was a one-time mistake, an impulsive decision that wouldn't affect her life. She dressed quickly, trying not to disturb him, and left the apartment with the same sense of urgency she'd felt the night before. As she drove home, her mind raced with rationalizations. She would never let Daniel find out. The marriage would return to its quiet normalcy once he returned. This was just a blip, she told herself, something that would be easy to forget. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. When Daniel came back from his trip, everything seemed normal at first. They exchanged pleasantries, he asked about her week, and Lena gave him the usual responses. She tried to act as though nothing had changed, as if the moment she had shared with the stranger had never happened. But there was a quiet tension beneath the surface, something she couldn't shake. Daniel seemed more distant, his quiet demeanor making her feel even more unsettled. His usual attention to her seemed absent, replaced with an unspoken withdrawal. At first, Lena convinced herself it was just stress from work or the trip, but there was a nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach that told her something was off. Was it possible that he knew? She dismissed the thought. It couldn't be. Still, a sense of unease crept over her as she tried to ignore the subtle shift in their dynamic. As the days passed, Lena noticed that Daniel had become more withdrawn. He was still polite, still caring, but there was a coldness to his demeanor that made her stomach twist. Their conversations were awkward, filled with forced pleasantries rather than genuine connection. Lena tried to convince herself it was nothing, that he was simply stressed, or maybe preoccupied with something else, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The emotional distance between them was growing, and the tension in their home was palpable. She began to wonder if Daniel had noticed the changes in her, if he could sense the guilt she couldn't hide. Every time their eyes met, she felt exposed, as if he could see right through her. The fear of being caught, of losing everything, began to gnaw at her, and she realized how fragile their relationship had become. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Daniel suddenly looked up from his plate and said, "I know." Lena froze, her heart racing. She laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but his expression remained calm, serious. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice betraying her panic. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. There, on the screen, were photos, images of the night at the bar, texts exchanged between Lena's friend and the man she had slept with. The evidence was undeniable. Lena's breath caught in her throat as her mind raced, trying to come up with a plausible explanation, but there was no excuse. "I didn't want to believe it," Daniel said quietly. his eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. But I know now. Lena's stomach churned with guilt and fear as she realized that everything she had tried to hide had been exposed. This wasn't just an affair, it was a betrayal, and the weight of that truth settled over her like a heavy blanket. Lena's mind spun, unable to process the reality of what was happening. The evidence was right there, staring her in the face, and yet she couldn't bring herself to accept it. She felt detached, as if she were watching the scene unfold from somewhere far away. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. It was a mistake, a one-time mistake. Daniel's silence was worse than any explosion of anger. He didn't shout, didn't accuse her. He simply stared at her with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. His coldness cut deeper than anything she could have expected. She pleaded with him, her words a frantic blur as she begged for forgiveness. But it was clear he wasn't listening. He was already so far gone. He didn't need to hear excuses. What they had was broken, shattered by the weight of her betrayal. In that moment, Lena realized how much damage she had done, not just to her marriage, but to herself. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and the consequences of her actions were far more severe than she had ever imagined. Daniel didn't raise his voice, but his words were final. Pack your things and leave. Lena's heart dropped as she looked at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. She had thought that if she apologized enough, if she explained it was a mistake, he might forgive her. But the coldness in his eyes told her it was too late. No, Daniel, please, she begged, her voice breaking. It was just one mistake, one night. You can't just... It wasn't a mistake, Daniel interrupted, his tone steady but firm. It was a betrayal. Lena's chest tightened as she struggled to find the words to make him understand. She wanted to explain, to tell him that it hadn't meant anything, that it had been a desperate moment of weakness. But deep down, she knew the truth. There was no excuse. Daniel stood, his back turned to her, signaling that the conversation was over. Lena collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. She had broken something beyond repair, and now she was being forced to face the consequences. Lena sat in her small apartment, the silence pressing in on her from every direction. She had never felt so alone. The familiar comforts of home, of her marriage, seemed like distant memories now. She couldn't stop replaying the events that had led her here, questioning how she could have been so reckless, so thoughtless. She had thrown away everything for a fleeting moment of excitement, and now she was paying the price. The weight of her actions settled heavily on her chest, and she wondered if she would ever find a way to forgive herself. She missed Daniel, missed the life they had built together, but now it felt like an impossible dream. As the days passed, Lena found herself grappling with the reality of what she had lost. She thought about her husband, how deeply she had hurt him, and the future they would never have. The isolation she felt in this new life was suffocating, and she couldn't help but wonder if this was the price of betrayal, a life broken beyond repair. Lena stared out the window, lost in thought. Her one reckless decision had unraveled everything she had once known. She didn't know if there was any hope for reconciliation, if the damage was too great to fix. All she had left was the gnawing realization that betrayal had consequences far deeper than she could have ever imagined. What had once been a safe, familiar life had shattered in an instant, and now Lena had to face the truth of her choices, unsure if she could ever return to the life she had before, or if it was even worth trying.